guys. Well, first of all, thank you that you're here, that you made the decision to come to Biohacker Summit. And actually, before the talk, I asked Teemu, what is the Finnish expression for saying Biohacker Summit is really great? And he told me, Biohacker Summit vitun jepa. Is that correct? I asked him for something polite. So you can go around and say that, and I think it means Biohacker Summit is really great. So we're going to talk a little bit about flow, decoding flow. So at Biohacker Summit, you get a lot of detailed information, of how to optimize your pharmacology and how many milligrams of a certain substance you can enter into your body to change something. With flow, it's a little different. It's a little more vague. I'm not sure if I'm able to control my presentation at the moment, but I'm just going to go with the flow. So I have actually 3 messages for you today. So what I want you to accomplish is to get into a state of flow and get more out of this experience, get more out of what you like to do in life and what you are doing in order to accomplish your goals. So what is flow in the end? So there are different people that have different definitions for it. And actually, I talked extensively about the concept of flow 3 years ago at Biohacker Summit. And I saw online randomly today that it's still the most viewed YouTube talk at Biohacker Summit online, I think with 180,000 views now. And I have no idea why. It's not because of me. I think it's because the title was really catchy, How to Hack the Flow State. And why I'm raising that subject is I think many people have a different idea of flow, what flow actually means. So an athlete might call it to be in the zone. A jazz player, like John Coltrane, might call it to be in the pocket, when they improvise and they play one tune after another and they can't stop. I heard an expression from a German community leader the other day, which I really liked. He called it a soulgasm, like a combination between an orgasm and soul. And I explained it, what does that mean, a soulgasm for you? And he said, it's when you're in that moment, when time stops, when you perform at your highest level, when you feel your greatest, and when the universe all of a sudden has sex with your existence. Doesn't that feel great? I say, yeah, that's actually exactly what I think when I talk about flow. And how do I come up why do I talk about flow? Should you listen to me? So my name is Max. I'm from Germany, and I founded a company called FlowGrade. And the whole idea behind it was to help people not upgrade themselves, but flow-grade them. So get them into a state of flow. And I like to create things. I speak on stage. I write. I like to write books. And I also organize an event in Germany, which is called the Flow Fest. And many of the speakers here, including Teemu has been there a couple of times, they speak at that event as well. And we'll try to help you to get into a state of flow. And what I do personally, I try to find it in my everyday life. And what I've been or become known for in Germany is that occasionally I go skiing in my underwear. And we made a challenge out of it. We called it skiing in undies. Now, undies on ice, actually, the undies on ice challenge. Not many people followed it, unfortunately, so we couldn't make it into a big movement just yet. But maybe you will join this year. And really quick again, so the presentation is working again. So just wanted to quickly go into what is flow, why is it important, and how you can get it. Before that, I forgot one slide. I wanted to share a little story that I came across with. Does anyone have an idea who these warriors are, what they're called? Vikings, yes. But they're called berserks. And that's actually an interesting story because I was asked to write an article in Germany about the history of biohacking. And they asked me, do you know who the first biohackers were? And I said, well, I'm not sure if they call themselves biohackers, but I'm pretty sure they go back way way back, probably to our early ancestors. And I came across that story, and I thought, actually, they were biohackers. So there was a Germanic tribe whose leader was called Harald. And Harald wanted to occupy Norway, not too far away from here. And so he was not really organized, and he didn't have soldiers they were strong, but they weren't really organized. And so he decided with his druids to upgrade them, the level of physicality and pain. And so they produced an extract out of a mushroom, this red mushroom with the white dots on it. And there was a story behind it that the god of war in the Germanic mythology, Wotan, his horse would ride over the fields, and wherever the saliva would drop, these mushrooms would pop up, and it would give extra strength to the warriors. And so when you eat one of those mushrooms fresh, actually it doesn't have a big effect. But if you prepare it into an extract, you dry it, kind of what people do right now here, it gets you the effect that all of a sudden you have these bloodshot eyes and you don't feel any pain and you're rattling with your teeth and you feel hardly any pain, like I said. And so these warriors would drink that before the fight, and then they would make up for their lack of organization of other tribes, and they would become known as the Berserks. And the name actually comes from, well, there are multiple theories where it came from, but that Ber is for a bear fur, actually, that they might have worn. And Serk means a weapon belt, in a way. And so they became known as superhuman warriors that would just don't feel any pain and then beat their opponents with brutal strength and with ruthlessness. Oftentimes after the fight, then apparently they would die because of the effects, but still it was worth the cause, I guess. So these were maybe some of the first biohackers that also upgraded their system. So what does that have to do with flow? Well, flow in the end is an altered state. And I'll get to that in a second. I'll show you a number, because the altered states economy in the world is one of the biggest growing markets that we have. And why is that? Because we all love to feel different. We all love to feel funny. I mean, every one of you who's here, when you come to an event, you want to feel a little different. You want to feel something. When you go out dancing, you want to feel different. When you go to a Tony Robbins event, Date with Destiny. Who's been to Date with Destiny? Anyone? Couple? It's like, come on, let me feel different. Let me feel the flow state. Let me feel ecstatic. So there's a huge hype. There's a trend that people actually are pursuing these states more than in the recent past. Why is that? Well, in our society, the church sort of had this offer of making you feel ecstatic. Now, many of you might think, oh, really? The church? Well, back in the day, when you think about it, when you went to church, there were these organs and they played loud music, and then they had incense, and then they had a priest who was usually really good at talking and then repeating stuff and getting you sort of in a trance, and then you started praying, and all of a sudden, your alpha waves were way high and you were in an altered trance-like state. So now we don't really go to church anymore every week, and it's also not so exciting because the church didn't really catch up with the other developments in technology, such as a discotheque. So when you go out dancing, you have maybe the same feeling that you had a couple of hundred years ago when you went to church. So there's a theory out there that it's an inherent need of us to feel ecstatic, kind of like to get food. You're hungry, you need food inside of you. There's something in our brain that tells us we need to be spiritual, we need to feel outside of our bodies, get out of our head. We even have these expressions. So we need to get out of our head, we need to get into different states. People call it different ways. I call it flow. Someone else might call it soulgasm, or in the zone, or in the pocket, or in the forever box. That's what comedians often call it when they joke, and one joke comes after the next, and they start improvising for you, and they can't stop making jokes because they get the immediate feedback from the audience. And so they're also in that altered state. And so what happens in this altered state? It's that your prefrontal cortex shuts off, your sort of egolessness appears, and time becomes relative, and you're somehow in a tunnel. So you forget about what actually you have to do maybe later on. You don't really get any feedback. So what usually happens when we enter the world around us, we identify by how other people respond to us. If they praise us, how they look at us, do they look at me funny? So I'm constantly in that beta state. So how do we get into beta? We live in a beta world, by the way. Just open your eyes. So right now, when your eyes are open, you're sort of already in a beta state. So what I want you to do for a second is just close your eyes for a second. And I've recently done a neurofeedback training, an intense one a week ago, for a whole week. I'll tell you about that in a second. But what was really clear is when you close your eyes, your alpha wave, usually in the back of your head, goes way up. And you enter already in a different state. Now, when you open your eyes again, your alpha will go down. So already now, I want to give you a quick piece of advice how you can enter flow or enter a state and enter your memory as well when you have to, for example, think of something or get out of your head for a moment or don't feel the fear at your desk, because it's the combination of closing your eyes and touch. So it's that old thinker's pose. So you can just do that. Let's say you're sitting at your desk and you have to be creative. You have to come up with an idea. You know somewhere it's stored. You can't think of the name of that person. Just do that for a second. That will already help you get into alpha waves. So now we are approaching, before we get a little bit more into the neurochemical definition of flow, I wanted to show you a video. This is a podcast interview I recorded with the founder of the Flow Genome Project, Jamie Wheal, one of them, and also the author of Stealing Fire, and one of, right now, the major influencers in the field of flow. And I hope it's working.
I am interested in transcendence. I'm interested in those moments where everything clicks, our critic shuts off, and life is joyful and effortless and inspired. And I've really just kind of spent my life trying to track that down. Music, dancing with friends, climbing mountains, surfing in the ocean, experiences that were so clearly bigger and more joyful than me or than us, that it just forces you to come back to your life with a new perspective. So really my entire career has been, how do you take peak states and turn them into abiding stages of growth and development? Because that to me felt like the rocket fuel, and everything else felt like a slug.
It's a bit hard to hear, right? Not right on the video, so I'm going to paraphrase it. So what Jamie Wheal pretty much explains is that he found these altered states to be very helpful in growth and development for himself. Because when you get out of your head and of your daily problems, you become more aware of what you really want, where your soul pretty much lies, where your real wants, your wishes, your ideas, your positive emotions are. That's what he accesses with the flow state. And one of the biggest inhibitors of flow is stress. It's actually a quite simple formula. So when you think about what is flow, it's pretty much the sum of all your stressors which inhibit flow. So it's a function of that. So when you get stressors out, and throughout the conference here already, you found out multiple ways how you can influence your stress levels with your nutrition, with lighting, photobiomodulation, with cold therapy, with breathing, which actually after me, you'll do some great breathing exercises with one of the greats, Casper van der Meulen. And so we have already the techniques in order to get rid of stress and to increase alpha. It's already there. So what that means is pretty much that we don't really have to increase our flow. We just have to get it back. It's already naturally produced by our body. And I want to narrow it down to actually one neuroelectrical happening in the body. So there are multiple things that happen in the state. You can actually look at it from a scientific perspective, and you can see that there are 3 levels that get you into a flow state. The one is anatomical, so your prefrontal cortex actually does shut off. It's called transient hypofrontality, where your ego is stored sort of in a way that allows you to get into a tunnel. Then there are neurochemicals that are being released, like dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, anandamide that help us with lateral thinking. And then there is one electrical component where your brain waves switch from a faster beta wave into a slower daydreaming alpha wave, sometimes jumping back and forth between alpha and theta. And in that state, what happens? Like, how is it defined now in flow research? So the Flow Genome Project came up with this acronym called STER, S-T-E-R, and that stands for selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. So these three happenings that I described to you with anatomical, chemical, and electrical components, that actually gets you into that state of selflessness, timelessness, so you lose track of time. Sometimes it speeds up, sometimes it slows down. Effortlessness, so everything feels really light. And richness, so all of a sudden you perceive more things. Like the snowboarder who's carving his line in the snow, he all of a sudden might take in a stone, that might break his flow and his leg, so he can detect it earlier, and he's in that tunnel and he only sees what is in front of him and can absorb that much bigger. So there's a lot more information being processed. So the sport that really gets people into flow is surfing or kite surfing, as well as these other extreme sports. Why? Because there's usually a higher obstacle to overcome. So your skills are sort of determined on your natural environment. You also have proprioception, so you need to balance yourself out. So you have multiple senses that are being activated, and that easily gets you into flow. The harder question is, how does someone in front of a desk with a desk job working on a computer program or developing software get into flow? Actually, software developers, they probably have an easier time because they can lose themselves in the code. But a normal office job, that you don't have this environment to trigger flow. And what you want is you want to exactly get here. You want your alpha waves to be really high, and you might have a little bit of theta as well. So we need to somehow shut that off. So before I give you a couple tips of how you can do it instantly, is why is that actually now important? Even for companies. There's one number that's really important. It's that when you are in the flow state, you learn up to 500% quicker. And that number, actually, I just didn't make that up. That's based on several studies also in the military, where snipers, shooters, they were actually put into a state of flow with transcranial electrical shocks, and their prefrontal cortex was electrically stimulated, shut off, and then they improved their skills up between 300 and 500% faster. You learn languages faster, you learn everything faster when you're in a state of flow. So it's really interesting for companies. Actually, Google is aware of that, and they have already installed flow-enhancing practices. The military does that as well. There's several other companies going that route, and they're actually very interested in the biohacking scene because they're incorporating many of the techniques that you're learning about here to get people into these states, because they know they'll perform better, they feel happier, and they learn quicker. It's a super easy equation. Another one is this one. Obviously, it's always about money. Is the altered states economy. And people love to be in different states. It's not only about flow. It's let's say yoga counts to that as well, meditation retreats, substances, drugs, obviously. And it's all about getting people into ecstasis. Like I said before, it's an inner need that we as humans have in order to feel different, in order to feel funny. We like it. We need it. So what's the problem with all of that? So as a society, we're not really comfortable with people who are out of their head. Because one of the side effects of flow is that you live outside of time. Your brain processes time all of a sudden differently. You're not in that linear time frame anymore. Maybe when you're with your child, or if you have children, and you see them playing, and you're like, come on, Bobby, dinner's ready. And they just won't come because they don't have that concept of linear time anymore. They're playing. They're in a state of flow, and they lose track of time. I was that kid, definitely. And it frustrates other people around you. So in a state of flow, it feels great for yourself. It might feel really bad for other people around you who are working with you or who want you to be on time for something, because your concept of time is differently. You live in a flexible time frame all of a sudden. Also, another problem with flow is that we are really wary of people manipulating us. We don't like it. Who knows that story? The Pied Piper of Hamelin. It's an old German story in a town called Hamelin. And the story goes like that. So there was a Pied Piper who was good at piping, and he could lure away rats. And they had a big rat problem in Hamelin, and they wanted to get rid of the problem, and so they hired the Pied Piper. And he got rid of the rats, but afterwards they said, well, we don't actually have the money to pay you now. We need to invest it for other projects. So they didn't pay him, and he got really upset. And so he decided to play some tunes to manipulate the children and lure them away from the town. And it's very symbolic for what we are afraid of as a society. We are afraid of people kidnapping our minds, kidnapping maybe our kids' minds, and luring them away and have them live different lives. Who knows, maybe the children are really happy afterwards. Well, I'm actually not sure how that story ends. Maybe that's... but still, we are very afraid of manipulation. And these states of ecstasy, especially when we witness them in other people, they make us really uneasy. So we want other people to behave according to our societal standards. And also another indicator for that is the problem with drugs. Well, as you see here, there's a book called Drugs Without the Hot Air by David Nutt. And he determined that in terms of two factors, harm to yourself and harm to others, the most hurtful drug to you is alcohol. It's one of the ones that is actually allowed. So it's up there, you see. Number 2 is heroin, crack cocaine. The other legal one is number 6, tobacco. Now cannabis is number 8. And the ones that really get you into a sort of a state of flow, into ecstasies, they're fairly down low there in terms of harm to yourself or harm to others, like mushrooms, like LSD, like MDMA. But we don't like them because they put people into states that we don't feel comfortable with. They don't perform in our societal standards. And then we can question if our societal standards might be wrong as well. I have a problem with that, actually, in terms of drugs, that they are external. So you use drugs in order to put yourself into a state. You override your own system. As human beings, like I said before, and now I'm tying that together, we produce alpha, and we kind of inhibit it as human beings. And now what we do is we produce actually these alpha waves and the flow state, and then we press it down by having a desk job where we feel really stressed, by drinking alcohol, caffeine. Then we need to feel the flow, though. We need to get into ecstasies, so we take a drug or something like that in order to put ourselves into a flow and override everything that we've done wrong from then on. And my message to you is to try to get rid of the stressors and not rely on technology or drugs in order to put you into a flow state, but then acquire the skills again to do it yourself. So how can you do that? There is a flow cycle. This is a drawing that I've done a while ago. It's actually in German, but you'll get it in a second. It's a 4-step process. So there's up to the right Widerstand, that means obstacle. So you always have to overcome an obstacle. Flow is never easy. It doesn't just come. It's usually something that is tied to a challenge that you have. If you're a writer, you have to sit down to write in order to get into a flow state. That's the hardest thing for a writer. As a musician, oftentimes you have to start playing a new song, maybe not something that you've played before. You have to improvise. Someone working on a new project, you have to challenge yourself. Really think about the impact that maybe your work has for other people, even if you work for a company, and try to visualize that and put some effort into thinking. That obstacle will get you into a flow state. Then it's the release part, loslassen, which means that you have to get rid of the stress hormones. So you build up adrenaline by maybe challenging yourself. It can be too much. If you're too stressed, you won't get into a flow state. It's a blocker. So you need to release that. Usually it's nitric oxide in the body that's being released, and that helps flush out the adrenaline. And then the next stage is the flow state, actually, the actual ecstasy. And after that, you need recovery as well. You can't be in constant flow. That's really hurtful. That means that you have a Ferrari and you press down on the gas pedal, but you have no traction, and you burn out the engine eventually. So you need some traction, you need to know what you do for, you need the recovery period in order to think of that. So there are 3 very easy ways of how you can do that. One of the biggest stressors nowadays that we totally underestimate is that we're constantly online. And these social media apps as well, they weren't developed in order to complement us. They actually, they tell, oh, cool, you can share your life with your friends and your photos and everything. It's super cool. It's convenient. It complements your life. It actually doesn't. It takes advantage of our weaknesses. So what it does when you're on Instagram, you actually get into a meditative theta state, just scrolling down your timeline, but that's a really hurtful theta state. That's not it's like your brain is being kidnapped and being shown stuff, and you're being sold. Your time is being sold. You're not getting anywhere into a flow state. So the easiest thing you can do is get offline. That's the cheapest thing. Because then you open yourself up. Like I said before, big triggers are the environment, are immersing yourself in rich environments. Your smartphone is not one of them. The second, a bit more, well, not expensive, but in terms of investment, you have to invest a little more, is meditation. There's actually a study done by North Carolina University which showed that just 4 days of daily meditation improved significantly memory, mental performance, attentiveness, mood, several factors. Why? Because when you meditate, you start observing your own thoughts. It's exactly what gets you out of your head. It increases alpha and theta, and it gets you out of the beta state. And how do you meditate? You close your eyes, like I showed you before. One of the easiest and quickest ways how you can increase alpha, which I sort of equate with flow, is you close your eyes and you touch your nose. Easiest way. You can become creative very easily that way. With meditation, I recommend just start easy. You can do it even while cooking, but it really helps when you close your eyes that way and when you sit still. And the third one, and that's a recent experience, I know I have hardly any time left, but that's a really, really interesting program that I've done over a week. It's called BioCybernaut, and you do intense neurofeedback training. What is neurofeedback? Here you see an image from our FlowFest where people could drive cars using their brainwaves. So the cars here on the Carrera Drive, they would only drive when you get into, for example, an alpha state. You can change the program, so it's a theta state. But then you can train that way. So the feedback is immediate, it's pleasant, and it's accurate. It has to be accurate. That's the thing. And that way you can train to get into a flow state on a daily basis. So I've done that 1 week program with Dr. James Hart. And here are a couple images of how it looks like. You're pretty much in a chamber, and you have all these electrodes. It really messes up your hair because you have the glue all over your head. And you have 5 speakers around you, and you hear with different instruments a concert of your brainwaves. And so you can influence that. All of a sudden, you think of something really pleasant. For example, your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and the tunes would go up. And the instant, though, you think, oh, cool, the tunes will go up, then they come down again. So it's sort of like a balance act. It's like meditation in a way. You have to think of nothing and focus on the feeling. And then you can play around with it a little bit. And then one of the biggest exercises that you do during the program is a forgiveness exercise. So when you're in a flow state and you get into that feeling of forgiving someone or even yourself, that's really powerful. And that really allowed myself as well to sort of like picture a hot air balloon. And you try to get it up. And we have all these tools here, and caffeine and stimulants and nootropics to sort of pump hot air into the balloon to make it up, to go up. But what I've learned is if you meditate, if you use neurofeedback in order to like deal with your issues, it's almost like throwing the sandbags out of your hot air balloon. So you don't need that much gas anymore. So you need to let go of things. That's a really easy time. If you're interested in these techniques, because I'm out of time here, I have a website. You can sign up for that. It's just there's nothing on there just yet, but you can just indicate your interest. And I'll send out an email after the event with more details on the programs, on how you can actually train to be more in flow. What I recommend also to do about like how to start with different techniques at your workplace. I know that the guys here also do lots of great stuff with the upgraded workplace here in order to enhance flow. It's a really interesting topic. It won't go away anytime soon. So our slogan is Go for Flow. That's what I wish you today. Being here is already a huge step in order to have more alpha and have more flow. So I wish you lots of alpha for the remainder of the day. If you have questions, please feel free to approach me. Thank you very much.